Hello everyone, your favourite Trisoft Revan619 here, and today I'm going to be talking about what I believe are my top 5 meta picks in the current version of the game, current patch, no DLCs, and where I think the meta sort of stands. Now, before we get into it, there are sort of 3 level brackets I'm going to talk about, which is the soul level 80, which is where I think is the most enjoyable aspect, which is using +6/15 weapons, because it's the most balanced and resembles the most Dark Souls 3-like engagements. Then we've got the 120, which is people who are still clinging on to the old Dark Souls 3 meta. And then we've got the 150, which are for those insane people who don't want builds anymore and just want to do everything. Now, those are sort of the 3 main areas of play. Where people choose to play is all up to them, so I'm not going to try and sway you one way or the other. But I am going to talk about the 5 builds that I think are the best in these, and then give some few honourable mentions at the end for some off-meta picks, which can be really fun to use, but you're going to have to work a lot harder to be useful with them. So in no particular order, we're going to get into them, I'm going to discuss them, and this is going to talk about where I think they are for duels and invasions. Some are better for duels, some are better for invasions, but let's get on with it. Number 1 on this list is going to be Occult Seppeku builds. Now, Occult Seppeku builds are basically you take a weapon that has innate bleed, you occult infuse it, and you apply the Seppeku weapon art. This can be done on polearms and swords that allow with thrusting. So 3 good examples of this is going to be the Scavengers twin swords, the Nagikiba katanas, and the cross Nagaginata, or however you pronounce that, polearms. Now, the reason this is really good is because on a single L1, you instant proc bleed. Even if your opponent is in the roll animation, your first L1 will catch their roll, cause them to bleed, and then can be followed up with a second L1 to hit a true combo. If you're just spamming running attacks, it can be hard to follow up, but this means that this weapon is absolutely fantastic for making pokes and retreating. Yes, these weapons in mind with the polearms here can also be used for elemental infusion, but that's a different build and something we'll talk about later in the video. But this is something that is very good. It has a 60-second buff, so it's quite a lot of time to try and get your damage in. Whilst you activate the ability, it will activate damage buffs such as the White Mask and the Lord of Blood's Talisman, and yeah, then once you have it on, you can just go ham with L1s. Now, you only actually need to buff one of them. In the footage behind you here, I am actually buffing 2, but if you buff your left hand, you can then have a different weapon art on your right hand, such as Quick Step, Bloodhound Step, or one of the ranged, like the Scream or Thunderbolt abilities, depending on what sort of build you're using. So you can still use a Ash of War that you like with only one buffed item, and then you're just doing instant bleeds and a lot of damage. And what's really good about this build is even after the 60 seconds, once the bleed has ended, you will still 2-hit L1 bleed people. So it's still very viable even if you can't get the buff off, which is why I recommend Occult Effusion, not bleed, and this will have a much higher damage and it'll be much more effective for you. Next up, we have the Moonveil Katana. Now, you know a weapon is good where just even mention it causes rage in your opponent, and the Moonveil Katana fits that very nicely. You see, the Moonveil Katana is a int scaling katana that has a lot of damage to it, a lot of usability, a lot of flexibility, and very short recovery, and it's very hard to punish. So some of the benefits of using the Moonveil Katana, not just high damage when you use something like the Shard of Alexander on it, so you can get that weapon art to have really high numbers. You can choose to use the magic scorpion ring, but that lowers the sort of your own defenses, so it's up to you really if you're going to use that. But one of the things that is super useful is you can cancel the weapon art's recovery. So if you swap your offhand after you use the Moonveil weapon art, you skip the entire recovery animation that they added to try and nerf it, and then you can keep running and then just spam the absolute hell out of it, which makes it really useful. More importantly, the Moonveil Katana is one of the few weapon arts in the game that you can quite easily dead angle shields with to sort of bypass the shield meta and still damage them for full damage. You can also use spells like Dragon Bolt, which is a faith scaling spell, so you're going to have to make some sacrifices to get that on there, which will cause shield poke builds to bounce off your body when they hit you, which allows you to open up their defenses and make some more favorable trades. So you can, if you have enough poise, take a poke, which causes the opponent to become open to allow you to land 1,000 damaging or more on the weapon art of the Moonveil. I think the highest I've done in a single hit with going for a full maximized int build was about 1500 damage. So this weapon is nothing to scoff at, and the fact that it's so quick means it is an absolutely fantastic roll catching and punching tool, and it could just allow you to play the game at your own pace with a lot of pressure and a lot of abilities that you can use to spam that makes it very hard for you to be punished yourself. You can also use the standard katana moveset, and I am a big fan of the power stance katana moveset. But yes, this is definitely deserving to be referred to a meta weapon. Next on the list we have the Rivers of Blood. This is a weapon that many people argue is the strongest in the game. True or not, it is a very powerful weapon. Once again, you can use the Shard of Alexander because this has an insanely strong and useful weapon art. So the Shard of Alexander buffs the damage of weapon arts, and this is a fantastic roll catching ability. One thing you can do with the Rivers of Blood is, because you can slowly build up bleed, if you can time your bleed proc on the first part of your weapon art, even if they're rolling, if you can proc their roll, it will stun them, allowing the second part of the weapon art to true combo. Just landing the second half of the weapon art with the Shard of Alexander can do up to 1000 damage, and that is a lot of dips, my guy. This benefits from bleed proc items such as the White Mask and also the Lord of Blood's talisman. Once again, you can weapon art cancel this the exact same way as you do with the Moonveil, and once again you can use the Dragon Bolt infusion, the Dragon Bolt incantation to fight against shield builds. Now, you can dead angle this as with all attacks in the game, but it is much harder to do on the Rivers of Blood than with other setups, but it can still be done. And yeah, once again, fantastic power stance moveset, really good moveset on the katana overall. Katanas in this version of Elden Ring, absolutely fantastic. I was not a big fan of katanas in Dark Souls 3, but in Elden Ring, they are just really, really good. I'd highly recommend it, and you can use this to set up many staggering combos, such as you can go from running attacks to instant crouch attacks, which come out very fast. You can even then mix up the timings with either running R2 or running R1, which you can then further mix up with the weapon art to try and just catch rolls, build those bleed procs, and if you can proc that bleed, like I said during the roll, it will true combo the weapon art. Huge damage, very useful, highly recommend this weapon, and yeah, it's just a lot you can do with it. Next on the list, we have the Bloody Helice with the Brass Shield and the Barricade Shield setup. Now, lately this has been getting snubbed because there's a more powerful shield in the game, but this is still one of the most powerful setups in the game. Now, this is an arcane scaling weapon, which means you can create a beast of a shield poke build, and you can even swap to other really good arcane weapons such as the Rivers of Blood, as previously mentioned. Now, one of the good perks of using the Bloody Helice here is the running R2s on this seem to have infinite poise damage and can break someone's passive poise of even up to 133. I haven't tested it against all of the hyper armors to see what buffs that they had there, but it is very good at a very high pressure tool, which makes it very difficult to space and out damage. Now, with this build, you can use the Brass Shield, as I said, because you only need a 16 strength investment, and then you can put Barricade Shield on top of that, so you pretty much have no shield damage being done to you. So this means that you can now poke trade like a beast. With these poke trades, you'll not only be doing damage, but you'll be building up bleed against your opponent. You can even dead angle these shield pokes in the mirror match, so you can bypass your enemy's shield, and then you can still do full damage to them. Shields are also just really good tools for keeping your distance, spacing, and then working out how to move in on your opponent. And like I said, with the running attacks in this thing, you can stagger those running attacks and do a lot with this. The actual weapon art on the Bloody Helice itself can do a lot of damage if you land it. There's also the fact that you can, once again, because it is a bleed weapon, use the White Mask and the Lord of Blood's talisman to get a lot of damage out of this. You can also use other weapons on this build, so you can, even though you're focusing on arcane here, you can swap to other weapons like to get a little bit of chip damage in there. Say if you wanted to quickly throw in a frost infusion or a lightning infusion, yes, it's only going to scale off your deck, so the damage is going to be much lower, which is why this is probably highly debated with another shield poke build of which one is more useful. But overall, this one is a lot easier to build, and because you can build up bleed easier, it beats a lot of builds just as easily. You don't need to use Dragon Bolt on this build because unfortunately when you're shield poking each other, the shield takes the hit and it's not your body, so people won't bounce. But the Barricade Shield, which was recently nerfed and only now lasts 8 seconds, will still cause enemy weapons to bounce when one-handed, but not obviously all shield pokes or even two-handed setups. It is a very good build to use, highly recommend it, very enjoyable for that sort of playstyle, but this is, unlike the previous ones, more useful for 1v1 duels than invasions. Now, if you are ganking and you're 2v1 or 3v1 against an invader, there is nothing that solo invader can really do to break your defenses with your teammates attacking, whereas if you're the invader, it is really hard for you to engage and block 3 people at once. So it depends what side of the invasion you're on, but for 1v1s, this is probably a little bit more powerful than the 3 previous mentioned ones, and it doesn't rely on a buff as hard as the occult build does, because you can block at the same time that you buff. So this is a very useful setup, very high pressure tool. The heavy thrusting swords have amazing running R2s, and worst case you can always swap to other arcane weapons that obviously scale with this. So there are items like the Mog Spear, which again has a really nice weapon art, but overall I would recommend the bloody Helice version with the Brass Shield and Barricade Shield. Now, the last one on my list of 5 meta builds for you in Elden Ring is probably the most hated build right now, which is the Fingerprint Shield with a heavy thrusting sword setup. Now, this setup does require 48 strength to do, so you're probably going to be using a quality weapon. However, I highly recommend lightning infusing your weapon. As I've previously said, one of the ways to sort of soft counter shield build is with the Dragon Bolt incantation. If you swap over to lightning, which mostly scales off dex and a little bit of strength, you will be doing extra damage to them because they have lowered their lightning defense to do this. So if you are using a lightning fused gold stitcher, this is an absolutely fantastic option for you. You can use quality if you want more damage, you can use poison in there, you can use fire, you can even just go pure keen, or even strength if your weapon will allow for it. Because the Fingerprint Shield is 90 stability fully upgraded when using the Great Shield Talisman, that's 100, meaning you don't take poise damage when you're blocking. This means you don't need a weapon art on the actual shield itself, like with the Helice build where you're using the Barricade Shield. So you can use Quick Step, Bloodhound Step, or, as I recommend, Thunderbolt or Bestial Scream. These will allow you to have some really good range punish tools, so not only can you be a passive shield poking turtle that can benefit from everything that the bloody Helice can, except from as good a bleed setup as they do because of the heavy strength investment, you can also use whatever OP Ash of War you want. This is probably the weapon and the setup that's going to get you the most hate, and it's probably the best 1v1 meta build at the moment because of just how easy it is to play with compared to others. Yes, you can't just mindlessly shield poke because then people can run and backstab you, but if you spread them out, they can't do that. Again, you've got those heavy thrusting sword running R2s that can just annihilate other people's poise. If you have high poise yourself, there's not much people can do. And even if they're using Bloodhound Step or Quick Step, you can make those trades because they don't damage you. And as long as you're aware of what weapon arts people are using, what gimmicks they're using, and what spells they're using, it is really hard for them to do any damage to you. You just got to not mindlessly block. Once you learn what the setups look like and you're not falling for like bait parries and whatnot, you will find this is probably one of the strongest setups you have ever used in any Souls game. It is currently quite imbalanced. Yes, there are some soft counters such as dead angling, which can be done by other shield pokes, it can be done by R1s of other weapons, it can even be done by some weapon arts, and like I said, the Moonveil has quite an easy way to do it. Things like the Dragon Bolt can really cause some difficulty on your own blocking, and your opponent can even use stuff like the infinite FP Stars of Ruin, which will very slowly chip you down. I think you can do well over half their health very quickly, even through the shield blocking. And if you come up in a mirror match, you're going to really appreciate having that lightning infusion, because yes, half your damage will be lightning, and only 30% of half of that damage will get through, but you will slowly start chipping, and if your opponent isn't using the infusion, they're going to be doing no damage to you whilst you're doing damage to them. So it is a very slow and methodical playstyle that might not appeal to anyone, but it is very, very powerful. And yeah, once you got your roll catching, your distance, your spacing, and your aggro down, you'll find that you can be very aggressive with this build. And even though it's referred to as a turtle build, you can be the one controlling the pace of the battle. You can be the one that's putting the pressure on your opponent, and you can just play within their range very safely. And there isn't that much they can do. They have to be quite a bit better than you to even be able to begin to counter the setup you're using. So whilst I have your attention, let's talk about some honourable mentions. A while back ago, I showed a way that you can mix 2 flasks to have infinite FP, which Adam Barker's then gone on to do what he called his mech build, but I started off with a mage build and infinite Stars of Ruin. So what you can do is you can mix this bubbletear, and for 15 seconds you have infinite magic, and then you can go absolutely ham. You can also use 2 staffs at the same time to get both buffs, so when you're using stuff like Carrion Slicer, you can do over 700 damage on the swing. So this makes mage builds quite effective, because if you use the minimum stats to use a weapon, in most situations the Moonveil is just going to be the better option to use. So if you want to go for a pure sorcery build, I highly suggest using the infinite FP build that I have previously shown off before. And yes, this can even counter things like the fingerprint, because if they block the first part of the barrage, they get stuck blocking and then they get forced to roll. The only effective counter really to this is to either use the magic absorbing bubbletear, which will also last 15 seconds, but then after that you then just have to deal with normal spell build. It can do a lot of damage to fingerprint and a lot of other setups, and it makes it really hard to move in if you don't have Bloodhound Step, like I said before, and if you don't know the angles to be able to do it. So it is a build I definitely recommend trying out and at least having a look at, even if it is off meta. I'd previously mentioned the occult builds using Seppeku, but a weapon that I went with, that I feel was stronger, was the cross. However, I would highly recommend giving it a go on scavengers. It is quite fun and very quick because it hits with 4 attacks, so similar build, still worth using. Very high poise can allow for trading. Because of the range differences, I don't think it's as good as the cross version, which is why I would refer to this as the off-meta one, even though it is very strong. It can also do a lot of damage to shields, unless they're using the maximum damage fingerprint. So I'd say I'd recommend giving this version of it a try as well. Another honourable mention goes out to dual whips. If you use the innate bleed ones with Occult, you can get quite high bleed build up very quickly, and the moveset is just really fun. Like, a lot of people tried to make whips happen in previous games, but I feel like they've done it really well here with the power stance, and you can put on 2 different Ashes of War, so you can have a lot of fun with it. And yeah, I highly recommend it. I recently tried these out, and yeah, I did really enjoy it. It is, once you know how the standing L1s work, the running L1s and jumping L1s, and even the quick step backwards L1s, they can become quite easy to counter, but it is really fun. And for an off-meta weapon, highly recommend it, and it's one that I even did in invasions, and I didn't really struggle that hard to win with them. It sort of did sometimes become a problem in a 3v run if people were playing really passively and all going for me, because the poise damage is really low. So against really high poise builds, you do start to struggle. The last off-meta honourable mention I'm going to give to is going to be pure poke spam ultra greatswords. Now, if you use this with quick step, bloodhound step, or just poking, you can get the poke weapon art. It is very quick. This is something that can be hard countered just by simply jumping, but very enjoyable to use. But that's it, everyone. Those were the top 5 meta builds currently in the game and as of the current patch, and some honourable mentions for some builds worth trying out. And I would just like to say that if you feel like you have something different that you think works slightly better for your invasions or slightly better for your duels, do mention them below and we can have a little discussion about them. And there are still plenty of Ashes of Wars you can put on multiple builds that are a lot of fun, so do try them out.